Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're speaking with a costume designer. Her credits include Conclave, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Independence Day Resurgence. We're pleased to welcome Lisy Christl. Lisy, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, welcome.
I'm very, very honored to be with you.
We'd love to start with our first question, which is always, how did you get to where you are today? Were you always interested in what people were wearing, or was this something that you found differently? Where did you grow up? What's your story?
My story starts there. I come from a really non-artistic background, but I assume that my mother wanted to go this path. And there are also signs that my grandmother wanted to go this path. But, due the times and the situation of women, it was not possible for them. And then I came along, and when I was pretty small, I had this interest of, reading, and this people came alive. I had no clue about, obviously I watched movies, but I had no idea that all our positions even exist. And my parents were not really happy with my choice. So I left with 18 and I started my whole path with an apprenticeship as a tailor.
Where was this? Can you just tell us, where did you grow up?
I'm from Bavaria in South Germany. So this apprenticeship was a first step somewhere. I still was not really clear about where this should lead me. But at the time I was 18 and I thought theater could be my path. Still, movie making was something really far away. Even in Munich, we had the Bavaria Film Studios, but I had no connection to this world at all. But I had also no connection to the theater world. And so one Friday afternoon, I thought, okay, sending letters here and there, whether no answer or a no, I thought, okay, just let's go there and knock on the door. And I thought, if I do this, I go to my favorite theater. At the time, this place called Münchner Kammerspiele. It's a very famous German theater. And, literally, this is what I did. Friday afternoon, I thought people want to go home. So I knocked on the door of the guy who was responsible for crewing, and he just wanted to go home. And I said, you have to talk to me. You must. And so, I said, okay, come in 5 minutes. And he told me, we really don't need anybody. We are fully crewed. The costume department is fully crewed. I really can't help you. And I said, okay, then let me work for free. And I think really only to get rid of me, he brought me in the costume department. And lucky me, the lady who ran the department was incredibly nice. And she said, you can't work for free. And I said, I can, if this is the only way. So, I worked in a pop during the night and during the day in the theater. And I made all the shifts, like Christmas, like New Year's, like Easter, all this nobody wants to do really.
Yeah.
And then one girl became pregnant and there I was,
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did that lead to the film industry? Was there a big, what was the film industry like in Germany at that time? And how did you get into the film industry?
So, there was a film industry. It was, I would say, the late days of Fassbinder.
Yeah.
And they made a film out of one of the biggest plays we had on the theater. And I was part of this crew. And this was when I saw the very first time a film studio. And, I was used to do this in one evening, this 4-hour play. And there was loads of action. And all of a sudden we had 40 days. And I found it so boring,
What was the film? Will we know it?
It's from Faust. It's Goethe's Faust.
Mm-hmm.
And, I read a lot because I dressed them in the morning and I undressed them in the evening. There was no continuity. There was no rain, no snow, no nothing. One costume a day. And I thought, filmmaking is the most boring thing on earth. So
have you changed your mind?
And I helped everybody, prop department, makeup and hair, just wherever I could be useful, I helped. And actually the head makeup and hair artist, he said, why don't you join us? I could introduce you to a costume designer and you could change the direction. And I said, no, of course not. No, this is really too boring. Anyways, I think we kept in touch. And 2 years later, he told me, look, movie making is really different. Your experience was something very particular, but now we're going to shoot Stalingrad and the costume designer is crewing her department. So should I introduce you? And, in these days, I was already in the free theater scene and money-wise, it was too much to die and too less to live, and I said, so how much money you make? And he said something like, I think it's 800 marks a week or something like this. And I thought, oh my goodness grace, I could do one movie and then I'm rich. So I met this lady. She showed me all these breakdowns. And, I read 1,000 soldiers, 800 soldiers. And I said, there's a mistake, right? This can't be. And she said, no. And I speak, in my world, 80 people on a stage was big, really big. I had no clue about this. And I turned it down and I said, I'm terribly sorry. I'm the wrong person. I have no idea how I could be useful to you. And then she really fought for me. She said, normally everybody wants to jump on this train. And you said no, because I don't have the education for what you expect from me. And, and she called me again and again, and she explained me how it works. And so I ended up there, and I had no idea that there's a world you have to get up at 2:00 in the morning. I cried after 2 or 3 weeks. I thought, I cannot, I really can't do this. But then you get used to it and you see the beauty of this work, even if your first movie is a heavy war movie. It's a bit difficult to see the beauty, but I could feel the beauty of it, the collaboration and all what I learned. And at the same time, it gave me the answer I always loved to read. And this was, in a way, the answer, how a figure in a novel becomes alive.
I love the fact that you tried everything you could not to get in this business.
Yeah, that's kind of an unusual story, isn't it? Really, yeah. Especially in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So after that movie, what happened?
We shot in Prague, and I was so in love with Prague. This was 1990. And all my friends moved to Berlin after the wall came down. And I thought, it's too busy over there for me. And I just stayed in Prague. And in Prague, it was really busy. And then I did straight the next movie. I learned a little bit of Czech, so I could work, talk with the tailoring shop and so on. And then I did a very early movie as costume assistant with Christoph Waltz.
Wow.
Yeah, the very young Christoph Waltz. A big movie, middle age. And again, with hundreds and hundreds of extras. But for me, then I thought, okay, this is movie making. Thousands and thousands of extras, getting up at 2:00 in the morning, coming home around 10:00. This is movie making. Okay, I accept it this way. And I think then I became a costume assistant for about 5 years in Germany, in Prague. And I worked with a Bavarian director. His name was Joseph Filsmeyer. And his first AD was also the first AD from Michael Haneke. And so, I talk about a time pre-mobile phones. And one summer, he called me and he said, I would love you to meet Michael Haneke. And I said, why on earth I should meet Michael Haneke? I was perfectly fine in my little world as an assistant. I knew. And he said, because he's looking for a costume designer. And I said, did you lose your mind? I cannot. It was again, no. And he said, look, come to Vienna and meet him. I said, I have no reference. Or what should I tell him? I'm a okay costume assistant now. I'm a tailor. I have nothing to show you. And he said, he knows all this. Please come to Vienna. So I came to Vienna.
Wow.
I met Michael Haneke. I thought I'm gonna die, And the first thing I told him is, I think this is all a big misunderstanding.
I love your story.
I said, look, I'm a costume assistant since 5 years now. I think I'm pretty okay in this field, but you are looking for a designer. So if you look for an assistant, here I am. And he said, yeah, I know all this. But can't you show me anything? And I said, didn't you listen to me? There is nothing. There is just nothing what I can show you. I really wanted to convince him, look for a designer and I will be the assistant. And he said, oh, no. You won't get rid of me so quickly. And he gave me a script. It was The Castle from Franz Kafka. And he said, go home, think about it. And then you come back in, let's say, 2 weeks and tell me how you would do it. So, I went back home to Munich. I couldn't sleep anymore. My heart was like this. And I made a very huge, it were mood boards and they were so heavy, I could barely bring them back to Vienna. And he saw all of this and he said, I don't like it at all. But you are a really hard worker and I respect this. Go to the office, make a contract, and then we start the job.
Oh
Wow.
my.
And then I worked 10 years with him.
Wow.
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 And his films didn't have thousands of soldiers and 800 people. How did you feel about that?
So far, the first movie was a period piece. The second one was Funny Games. And
Funny Games, yeah.
and I never did a contemporary piece. I did not know that you can buy costumes somewhere. Costume is a tailor shop. It's an aging shop. And, this world, this is where I came from. Back in the theater, then these 5 years in the movie world. I had no clue you can do this, that this is allowed. You go somewhere and you buy a dress. I found this really cruel. And only these few people, every day I thought, I'm sure I forgot something. I'm really sure I forgot something.
But did you, I mean, in Funny Games, the characters, the designs of their clothing seems so specific, the two young guys in their kind of white, athletic kind of costumes. And I mean, it's all very specific. Did you not design that? Did you
Oh, yeah.
find them off the page?
Yes, because, at the time he was not that famous. He had small budgets, but the majority of the budget went into production design because the house was built and, it was a fantastic experience. We were a tiny little crew and we did everything. But at the time I lived already to Vienna, with meeting Michael Haneke, I moved to Vienna. And Vienna is also a very specific environment. And there are so many ways how you can do a proper research. And for most of the Haneke movies, I just went to the specific environments like tennis clubs. I spent afternoons and afternoons in these environments and made my photographs from these people. It was an entire different world for me. These families who spent their days in tennis clubs. My father had a garage. I did not know a world where you can spend your day in a tennis club.
Yeah, right.
And there,
it's news to me now, really.
And there I saw these young men from these bourgeois families with these short white pants but the white gloves, they were written in the script. But everything else has a lot to do with this Viennese society.
So when you started with him, since you had given him ideas that he hated, how did you sit and talk with him for a long time? What was your process in the beginning, and then working with him for so long, what did your process
did he ever get to like your ideas?
I mean, it's all like yesterday, because I would say that I stayed straight in Vienna, and at least for 2 or 3 weeks, I spent every day with him. We watched movies together. He knew I'm very young, and he knew this is my first job, but he behaved very fatherly. This is not him, but it was like this. And, I bought tons and tons of books and I schlepped them over. And he disliked just everything. And again, after a while, we were already on Lisy and Michael. And I said, Michael, you know everything better. You can do everything on your own. You don't need me. And he said, this is such a misunderstanding. This is for me movie making. You have to dig into it, and you have to find the things, and it's fantastic how we approach this together. But I was a young chicken. I just did not know all this. I had no idea from process. I was an assistant before. Anyways, I found the book. It was from a Czech photographer, and I knew it. I knew straight away, this is what we are looking for. This is the world he talks about. And it was such a great feeling for me to understand his words, and that you have to look for the right tone of a story. And it's not only clothes, it's the mood what you have to find together, right?
And
Yeah.
but don't you also have to think about the practicalities, which kind of goes against the concept of being able to think only about the mood, but the practicalities of, oh, well, she's going to fall in the water in this shot, so therefore it shouldn't be, and then run down the street, it shouldn't be this kind of material that wouldn't work well with water, or those kind of logistical
Yeah.
things.
And also multiple costumes when
Well,
you've got a lot of blood.
yeah, right.
That's
But-
funny games.
This is as an assistant, this world I knew.
Ah,
I felt pretty secure in this part of the job. The new part was to be responsible for the creative part, really.
yeah.
And later on, we did The Time of the Wolves together. And he wanted Isabelle Huppert and the children in this kind of puffy jackets. And I said to him, you cannot do this. There are 10 minutes. They only walk, and the sound mixer will kill me.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And
what did he say?
And he said, oh, no, he will deal with it. And I thought, oh, no. So we made puffy jackets, and they looked like ordinary puffy jackets from the rack. But they didn't make any sound. And at the time, we had this little cassette recorder, you remember?
Yeah.
And, I walked with it, and I recorded the sound, and there was no sound, and I was so proud.
Oh.
And, walking through Vienna on a windy day with this strange face, how is the sound?
Surprised you didn't get arrested.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that part of the fun of trying the artistic thing of finding the look that's right, but then having to also make it logistically work? Is that kind of the fun to make them work together, in other words, because they are two very different sides?
I think it's all about, as a costume designer for movies, you have to think this costume must work visually, but also practically. And this, this goes with, to make sure your on-set crew is always in a good place. They have enough costumes, as you said before, enough repeats, everything like on a movie, like all quiet. I think basically every lunch break, we showed Edward tests about, when with the eggs in the pocket, the stabbing of the French soldier, all this was first. I made tests with my assistant. Sometimes I was the victim, sometimes she was the victim. And, we tried everything, obviously with makeup and hair, to make, that on the day, I want everything be perfect as possible, because there's always, as we all know, imperfection comes anyways. So, but to to get ready and to be properly prepared with everything, blood and dirt. And this is something I'm very, very passionate about it. The idea is one passion, but the other really important thing is for me, I work with a textile artist since 30 years. And, she knows me inside out. We are friends. We work together. And she knows the right dirt. It was like a recipe. She's like a witch, a little bit of rice, a little bit of this. And I told her, but Marie, you are aware of it. We have thousands of them, thousands. And she said, I just have to find the recipe. And then, and then we bought the big pots. So, and this was always, I hated costumes without life. This is so important for me. It's like a dead body. A costume needs a lot of treatment, whether it's a uniform, whether it's an ordinary black T-shirt. Like we all wear, we use our things.
Yeah. I felt that was so impressive on Time of the Wolf, because the costumes seemed individual. I mean, there were a lot of characters in the film. They seemed individual, and they seemed like they were real costumes that he'd either worn or they'd found. Or I was interested, what was the conversation you had with Michael about the period, the setting, the feel of that film, Time of the Wolf? Because it's set in after some apocalypse, but you're not really aware of what the time is, what the year is, or anything. What was the discussion for that? Do you remember?
The period was the now. It was a contemporary movie.
Right.
And, I remember very well, there was one role, he was the dealer for water. And since there was no more gasoline and all this, they came with a horse. But he had one of these jackets what we wear when we are on set, these Gore-Tex jackets. And these elements were really important. And it had a very bright blue, a very unusual color for him. But I told him, look, this brings us in the here and now. It's the color, modern materials. This was a bit difficult to digest for him, but at the end of the day on location, he said, yeah, you are so right, because, it's such a middle-aged image. The guy arrives who sells the water. So to bring this into our modern days, you had to use something very obvious. But
that was what was so striking about it. It had these sort of like the people had gone back to almost middle-aged sort of behavior,
Yes.
but it also was set in a modern, almost, well, to me, it was slightly futuristic, retro future. It was really, I thought that was really brilliant. When you do then, in contrast, something like All Quiet on the Western Front, which is obviously set in a real time, real period, historical, how much do you research, and how much do you stick to historical accuracy?
We did a lot of research, weeks and weeks and weeks. Obviously, we worked with a military historian. He opened up his archives for me, and he double-checked everything what we researched and so on. But, after a certain time, you learn there are veterans and there are the newbies in the field. So a veteran, after a year in the trenches, and he knows how to behave. Now, he knows exactly when the rain is coming, how he needs his blanket, how he can wrap himself, how he can make it as comfortable as possible. And we all know this is not talking about comfort. No, you did 1917, you
Mhm.
know. And these young, innocent boys walking into this war, thinking they are heroes, into this. I will never forget this scene 28 and 29 with this pouring rain. They arrive in the trenches. And all these actors were really, really young. For our main actor, it was the first movie. And, you know, it was
Wow.
from both sides. It was, in reality, he was so excited about his first movie. And he got thrown into the most horrible circumstances you could have on a movie. And, you know, there are things, I think we stayed pretty accurate, but also I said, look, if there is the material from this, I don't find the right word in English, you know, a tent is, what is this material?
Canvas.
Canvas. Yes. No,
Canvas.
they have these canvas blankets. This is part of their equipment. And I said,
Mhm.
look, if you're in this war since 1 or 2 years already, in your time off, you would invent something what covers you up. So I invented this kind of fisherman pants, you know, and this, I think people would do this. So we did not go crazy, but after a while, I thought, I'm so certain they would invent practical things for themselves. And also, you know, I remember very well when I went the first time camping, you can see immediately the people who built a tent the first time or the pros who are there, you know, it takes 10 minutes and boom, they are done. And I said, yes, these young soldiers, they are the new ones on the camping ground. And the other ones, they are the veterans. They know how to behave.
That's interesting. So you don't have to be trapped by having absolute accuracy. You know, I read this in the book, so I can use it. I didn't read this in a book, so I can't use it. Instead, you're much more, I hate to say the word, but organic in the process, that this is what they would have done. So I believe it works.
Yes, this is what I truly believe. And I think you have to know the books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to add on something, you have to know the basics. And I always ask this military advisor, and sometimes he said, but I have no proof for this. And I said, but how long are you doing what you do? Do you have a proof for everything? You can't. And on top of it, photography was not something so common in these days, right? So it's not like we behave with our iPhones today, constantly seeing something and making a picture from something. It was so precious. So why on earth should they make a photo from something what is not perfectly right? So
It's interesting because a lot of the photographs from the First World War were actually staged later. So it's rather like if you go and photograph farmers in a rural environment and they know you're coming to photograph them, they dress up. You know, but if you look at photographs taken, you know, without their consent or whatever, you know, my dad, for instance, was in the Second World War, and photographs of his regiment, where he was in the SAS in the desert, in the North African desert, and some of the gear they wore after being there for like month after month was like weird. They were like hippies at the Isle of Wight pop festival or something. It was all kinds of costumes, but it was all to you know, in because of the sand and the dirt and the sun, they were just trying to make the best of
Yeah.
it. So
Well, it's true that in real life, things are always
yeah,
different
random
and
things.
random, but so many people are just looking for the answer and the one solution. And I think that makes it a lot less interesting visually. And also, we've been on a film where we had advisors, and it was about the Dalai Lama, but they all had their own memories on how
Yeah.
things were done.
Mhm.
So we would get different
Yeah.
answers. And
The set would stop for half an hour. Everybody discussed what it was really like,
Yeah.
you know. It's time.
Yeah.
and I think in that case, what's really important is just to have an overriding vision.
Yeah.
So you pick the answer that actually is going to fit
Yeah.
into that vision, because you always have to remember everything's got to go into one thing.
Yeah. And never forget, we are all individuals. No, there is an overall rule,
Right.
but there is always an exception.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what makes it feel real
Yeah.
sometimes, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
How different is it working with one director and another? I'm sure it's fairly different between.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, if you worked 10 years with Michael Haneke, and then what was it like to work with someone completely different?
Roland Emmerich, right?
Yeah,
Because you worked
right.
with Roland Emmerich on a few films, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, and in America.
Different processes.
Yeah. You know, again, I knew these movies, but this was, again, a universe I thought I will never touch. Never. And it's
So why did you?
because Roland Emmerich came to Berlin, and Studio Babelsberg called me, and they did this the very first time because apparently they saw a movie we did in China, and it was a big Second World War in China, and this was the reason why they called me. And I said, yes, of course, I'm very happy to meet Roland Emmerich, but could you please send me a script? Because what should I talk with him? And they said, oh,
Yeah.
no, we don't send out scripts. And I said, look, why should I meet a Hollywood director? And we have in common that we are both German. So I think this is not enough for a conversation.
Not enough.
Yeah.
And then, I was so stubborn, and they sent me the script, and this was anonymous. And I, there are all these dreams, and one of these dreams was to make a Renaissance movie. And all of a sudden it was right in front of me, but from a director who's really known for other subjects. And
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the film you just mentioned that they had seen was John Rabe, if I'm not mistaken, which was about the massacre in Nanking, right?
Yes, exactly.
Which seems like very different subject than Shakespeare.
Yeah, but this is the beauty of what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, for some weird reason, Roland Emmerich decided to work with me, and then we made this film Anonymous, and he asked me again for White House Down, and then for Independence Day, and I'm incredibly grateful for. I had this experience. I saw a new part of movie making, a very different way of movie making, but at the same time,
different in what way? Can you just describe what was the difference between doing that and John Rabe or working with Edward?
The movie making in Europe, first of all, is pretty different. Yes, on John Rabe, we had also a big crew. And I was also used to bigger crews, but I was not used to 400 or 500 people of a crew. And I had no clue about these huge trailer parks and all this. But,
Yeah.
I just pretended to know. I just pretended to.
It struck me when I first came to America, right? Well, you shoot in the UK, and it was like you'd have a couple of little vans
Yeah.
and a generator,
Yes.
like on the street, and then you'd go. And the first time I was in Alabama, right? And I went to the set on location the first day, and I walked about half a mile by all these trailers, and I thought, what the bleep, bleep, bleep is this?
Yes, yeah.
Before I got to the set. And, then I realized the camera truck was like about 10 trailers away,
Yeah.
if we wanted
Yes.
anything.
And
It was just insane.
the funny thing is, it wasn't a particularly big movie.
No, it wasn't a
either.
big movie. And I did, as a cinematographer, I didn't need much of it because I like very minimally, It was really funny.
Yeah.
Now it was funny anyway. At the time, it wasn't so funny. But
Also all this bureaucracy. There was a moment I thought,
yeah.
will I ever have a costume in my hands? I was really a bit desperate in this, but then you learn to, and you get used to this world, and you find all over the world there is a fabulous soul, and you find these souls all over the place.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we do what we do. It's the logistics are a bit different, but we do what we do. And
So was it fun? Was it fun, really? Once you got used to it?
To be honest, on Independence Day, I became homesick.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because after that, you did a small film back in Germany, right? Balloon.
Produced from, very small, very local. And and then I heard, no, this was before, I heard that Terrence Malick will do a movie in Germany, and I knew the producer.
Right.
And I thought, they can say no. But I called them and I said, this story is based in Austria. It's a story I know very well. And I just wanted to say I'm available.
Right. Was that the first time you actually kind of went to try and get on a movie rather than trying to avoid being on a movie?
Maybe yes. Yeah, maybe yes. Yeah.
So Terry Malick must have been so different to work with than other directors. How do you, because prep time is limited, how do you figure out? Do you have tricks to figure out how to work with the director, how to get what you need from the director? Because, of course, you need to know what they're looking for. How do you go about that?
I love when I read a script parallel, I start like an analysis. Is this the word? To analyze the script. I try to find images, and this goes really next to each other. I read and I try to find these images. And before this happens, before I talk the first time to a director, and this was the process with Terrence Malick. He called me and he asked me if I could imagine to do this movie. And I said, let me send you an idea about it. So I did this, and this is basically how I work. Meanwhile, I read the script, I might parallel. I try to find images. It's a certain feeling what a director has to his script, right? And this is, on my point of view, the best language. It's better than every conversation is, without talking about a script, putting together mood boards for this world. And this is the starting point. From there, I can go. From there, I have, this is the groundwork.
And does it also allow you to see whether the director is seeing the script in the same way you are?
Exactly.
Because sometimes it can be quite different.
Yes.
And have you ever had an experience where they wanted a gothic horror movie and you thought it was a comedy or something very different? Obviously not that, but Have you ever experienced that when you realized?
Michael Haneke, by the size of his
Actually, it was really only once, and they gave me a lot of prep in the early stages of prep. He made a camera test plus like a casting on camera, and there I saw this will never work between the two of us. This will never work. And I told him, I said, look, I don't think we will be happy with each other. This did not work. And this was the only time really I think there's the process is you don't have to be happy all the time with each other, but you need a common language, right?
Exactly.
And if there's no common language, it's better not to go on this journey together.
And it's also very good to find that out early rather than later.
Yes. Because otherwise it's so painful, isn't it?
It is. It's just constantly butting your head against a wall because you're not going in the right direction.
And you guys get up even earlier than we do on a film set. Costume's always the first place to get there and the last to leave. So,
But this I learned very early, so I cannot complain now.
Yeah, right. You knew what you're getting into. Well, we talk to friends outside of the film industry, especially in rural England where we have a place. They say, what? You get up at that time? What? You do 6 days a week? My God.
But my uncle and my aunt, they had a butcher shop. And so I knew from them they had to get up really early. My grandfather was a baker. I knew from him they had to get up really early. But, it was not in my dreams. I thought that this idea about tailoring and costume making ends up in get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. This was an unexpected side effect.
Have you ever had 2 projects overlap? So you have to be concentrating on 2 different things at one time?
Only once. And this, one movie was almost finished and the other one came earlier because the lead actor had new obligations, and so they had to start earlier, but only once. And I'm not good in this. And now I'm better in really focusing on one story, making, I love to have 1, 2, 3 months in between.
To sort of clear your head and start afresh. But how much do you work with the actors too? You have a vision of what the costume should be, but sometimes the actors will come in with their own visions. And how do you deal with that?
I listened to your podcast with Jenny Bevans also. And I think I'm a mix and match. I do extensive groundwork and mood boards, but I also love to bring it together in illustrations. So it's both worlds. And with Edward, also with Michael Haneke, and also with Roland Emmerich, and the same for Terry Malick. All these directors came up with casting very early on. So, because you need an actor to involve him in the process. So I try to involve them on a very early, still floating process.
Right.
You need to talk a bit then about Conclave, because it's historical piece. I mean, in a sense, it's based in a real world, but very specific kind of place and costumes, but very much an actor's piece in a
Mhm.
way. So what was the process in prep? I mean, how much time did you have with those actors, and did you do, screen tests and, camera tests and all sorts?
The glory of this project was, first, I was really sad that they postponed this project for 1 year. But at the same time, this was the very best thing what could happen to us, because by then Ray Fiennes was free to do the movie.
Right.
And, to touch the world of the Catholic Church this is another, I don't know, it was after the groundwork, after learning what are the symbols, what are they gonna wear, when, and why they wear it. And it's an old world, basically. Now it goes back to the old
Mm.
Romans. And yes, it changed, but in a way, the last 500-600 years, there were no more big changes. But I felt always like the good student, I know how it works, but I was not happy. And I thought, could you touch it? So I showed the original attires to Edward and Stefan, his DOP. And I said, gentlemen, look at this color. It drives me crazy. It's this orange red. How long your eye can bear this color? And also, I did not like the fabric. It's the original
Mhm.
piece. It's quite flimsy. It's, a bit too much of polyester. So, the richness,
Yeah.
what the imagination of the liturgy from the Catholic Church
Mhm.
is, whether we like it or not, but it's very beautiful, and it brought fantastic artists alive. And so I could convince them pretty quick to change the color and to change the fabric. And then I saw, I don't know if you know, there's a designer, a Spanish designer, at the same time like Dior and these people. His name was Balenciaga, Spanish
Mhm.
man. And right now it's again very fashionable. And I saw the actual couture show from the actual collections in 2022. And I thought, this is interesting. There's something. And I went to my library and read in the books about the real Balenciaga, the original. And he was a very faithful Catholic. And he was an altar boy. And he went to church every day. So the idea of his collections at the time were very much based on the vestment of the Catholic Church. And,
Oh, wow.
this brought something together that we really touched very carefully, but we touched everything. I changed the cuts. I got rid of the lace so that they are really equal, all of them. And Rafe was at first not very happy because it was a heavy woolen fabric and it was very warm. But I told him, it's very cold in Italy in January and February. So, but obviously, the studio was pretty warm. But anyway, I think he forgave me meanwhile. So, and talking about my collaboration with Edward, we did meanwhile 4 movies together. And he is just such a gift for me. He combines all the directors I worked with in the best possible way.
And how big a crew, and how did you crew up for Conclave? I mean, was it again? It must have been quite different than working on Independence Day, for instance.
Yes,
Tell us about it.
because on Independence Day there was a lot of money, and on Conclave there was not a lot of money.
Yeah. But is that kind of good in a way when there's not a lot of money, because it really concentrates everybody? Is that sometimes you feel it's a more intimate kind of group of people working
Yes.
together.
And it seems like everybody has more of a
Responsibility.
more responsibility
Yeah.
in the movies,
Yeah.
so they're much more engaged.
Look, for me, the most important person is when I go abroad, what I do basically every year, is to find the right supervisor. And obviously, after 30 years in this movie world, you know people a bit all over the place and people you worked with, and you can ask them, what do you think? Who would be a fit with me? And so I met this beautiful supervisor, Ilaria Marmucci from Venice. Such a strong little wreck. It's all there. And we discussed everything together. We were between 20 and 25 people, including tailoring shop and aging and dyeing and costumers and background.
Wow.
So, and this worked very well, very, very well. I was more than happy. In Italy, the craftsmanship is so wonderful, and I was so warmly welcomed, and they treated me like we worked together forever. And with this lifestyle, my lifestyle, it's difficult. I have 2 people who I take with me, but last summer we worked in Hong Kong and Macau. But I was lucky again. Beautiful people, a beautiful crew from Hong Kong. Again, around 20 people. So I think it keeps you alive if you are moving around and open-minded for. There are film people all over the world, and there are pretty good ones all over the world. Not everywhere, but if you go to a film country, most of the time I'm lucky.
And also working with different people who are good at what they do always brings new ideas to oneself about how you can do something.
Yes.
And you go, oh, wow, I didn't think
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Absolutely. And so, we really stayed friends with the Italian crew from Conclave. And it's, I think, a constant celebration in Rome, in Venice, in Milan, wherever they live. And we have this group chat, and it's very touching how this came all together. Yeah.
So in the end, you're quite glad you were forced into the industry.
I'm very glad, believe it or not, Roger.
Well, we're glad too.
We're glad too.
You do very good work.
I wanted to ask you on a set. Are you usually on the set with the shooting crew every day of the shoot?
Yeah.
I mean, some costume designers you don't see very often, and some you do. How do you work? Are you very sort of hands-on?
Yes. Every movie has a different nature, but I'm for sure there every morning. I'm there as soon as a new costume comes along. But for example, last summer we shot in Macau a movie with Tilda Swinton and Colin Farrell. So in a very strange environment of casinos, and so I was basically all the time on set. I mean, let's say most of the time. I did fittings on set because it's just the sensibility of the environment. Sometimes you can go, and sometimes it's better to stick around. But overall, I love to be close to the shooting crew because how it evolves, you never know.
Yeah, exactly. I would think that seeing it as it's evolving on the set tells you more about the characters, because the actors always bring something slightly different into their interpretation, which is great.
Yes.
But maybe that might change something down the line that you had been thinking because the character's a little different.
And I think, it should change because, as we said before, You might think it's going to be a sunny day and a lovely day, and then the rain comes and you got the wrong message, and the tax office calls you and up. It really messed up your day. And one day in Macau, Colin asked me, "Do you mind if I jump with the entire costume in this pool?" and I said, "Yes, of course. You can invite me for an ice cream." Yeah, why not? And I saw the eyes of the costume, and she was, "What?" And I calmed her down and I said, "Look, we have still fabric. I think it's a brilliant idea. I will provide 2 more pants and 2 more jackets. We can do it. We can do it." And I saw the first cut last week, and it's perfect. It is perfect. So, and all this, how should you learn about the mood of the movie, the mood of an actor if you are not present?
That's very true. That's actually very
Yeah.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you would say you've basically learnt your craft as you've sort of gone along.
Yeah.
Would that be true?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. For sure.
It's just interesting how people find their way in the industry, Yeah.
Some of them kicking and screaming
Kicking and
all along the way.
Yeah. But it was important for me first to have this apprenticeship as a tailor. Then I went back to school and I made my master. So the craft of clothes making, I learned, and this still gives me a lot of security, because I think my process and my brain works. I have to know how the cutter would do the cut. And I can tell him, "I think we can do this. We just need another dot here and we can go wider there." This is really important for me. But movie making, to be a costume designer for movies is, I think, experience learns you a lot. How should you or where should you learn a scene like 28 and 29 on All Quiet on the Western Front? There is no university what would learn you this.
Yeah.
And after 30 years doing what I do, then you experienced lots of countries, lots of genres, lots of people. And this is beautiful. And I'm still super nervous. And I still think, maybe next time they will see I'm the wrong one.
I don't think so.
Yeah. I know that.
Yeah. But I think it's also important, always to work on ourselves, and always to be open to learn. And I think this is also the beauty of our film world, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
That's a lovely
Very lucky
statement.
world to be into. Yeah.
Well, thank you for this.
Thank you very much.
This has been
for talking
amazing.
to us.
You're amazing.
You're amazing, yeah. We look forward to seeing Macau.
Yes, I think you can. It's a very, in the line of All Quiet, Conclave, Ballad of a Small Player. There is a thin red line, and you met Edward, and I'm sure you will see the thin red line.
Great.
Yeah.
I look forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot for having me, and I hope one day we will meet in person. This was really
that would be nice.
So
That'd be
beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. You take care of yourself. Cheers.
Thank you.
If If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.